Comprehending racial disparity in federal criminal sentences.
We have more work to do when more young black men languish in prison than attend colleges and universities across America.
Using rich data linking federal cases from arrest through sentencing, we assess the contribution of prosecutors' initial charging decisions to large observed black-white disparities in sentence length. Pre-charge characteristics, including arrest offense and criminal history, can explain about 80% of these disparities, but substantial gaps remain across the distribution. On average, blacks receive almost 10% longer sentences than comparable whites arrested for the same crimes. At least half this gap can be explained by initial charging choices, particularly the filing of charges carrying mandatory minimum sentences. Prosecutors are, ceteris paribus, almost twice as likely to file such charges against blacks. Patterns and trends. The demographic characteristics of homicide victims and offenders were different from the characteristics of the general population. Based on available data from 1980 to 2008, blacks were disproportionately represented as both homicide victims and offenders. The victimization rate for blacks was 6 times higher than the rate for whites. The offending rate for blacks was almost 8 times higher than the rate for whites. Males represented 77% of homicide victims and nearly 90% of offenders. The victimization rate for males was 3 times higher than the rate for females. The offending rate for males was almost 9 times higher than the rate for females. Approximately a third of murder victims and almost half of the offenders were under age 25. Between 1980 to 2008, black people committed over half of the crime and made up only 12% of the population.
Distribution of prison sentences. Black male defendants in U.S. criminal cases receive much longer prison sentences than white men do. For instance, in federal courts, the average sentence during 2008 and 2009 was 55 months for whites and 90 months for blacks, U.S. Sentencing Commission 2010. But does this stem from disparities in the criminal justice system, as opposed to differing crime patterns, and if so, at what point in the criminal process do those disparities emerge? We find substantial black-white gaps in initial charge severity conditional on arrest offense and other observables, including dramatic disparities in the use of mandatory minimum charges. These initial charging decisions can explain at least half, and perhaps substantially more, of the black-white sentencing disparities that are not otherwise explained by pre-charge observables. Upon analyzing federal cases from the most recent years available, fiscal years 2007 through 2009, involving black and white U.S. citizens arrested for violent, property, fraud, weapons, and public order offenses, while other categories of crimes, most notably drugs, were excluded from the main analysis due to data limitations, more limited analyses conducted with broader samples suggest fairly similar racial disparity patterns. The sample is limited to males because racial disparity patterns differ by gender, and those affecting black males are of particular policy importance. Black men in the U.S. are incarcerated at a rate over 6 times that of white men and over 10 times that of black women, and men make up over 80% of federal defendants in the sample period. Using both regression methods and a semi-parametric reweighting approach, it's shown that black defendants face significantly more severe charges than whites even after controlling for criminal behavior, arrest offense, multiple defendant case structure, and criminal history. Observed defendant characteristics, for example, age, education, defense counsel type, district, county economic characteristics, and crime rates. Unexplained racial disparities exist across the charge severity distribution, especially at the high end. The most striking disparities are found in the use of charges that carry non-zero statutory minimum sentences, herein mandatory minimums. Ceteris paribus, black men are, on average, nearly twice as likely as white men to face such a charge. The discussion considers possible explanations for these disparities, including but not limited to statistical and preference-based discrimination. The ultimate importance of these charging disparities rests on whether they persist through the judicial process and affect sentences. They do. There is a large raw black-white sentencing gap across the distribution of sentences, as illustrated in Figure 1. The total black-white disparity has been decomposed into that which can be explained by arrest offense, criminal history, and other pre-charge case attributes. When decompositions are performed using those variables alone, black sentences are still nearly 10% higher at the mean than white sentences, with significant gaps throughout the distribution with the largest unexplained disparities at the highest deciles. Prison sentences applied to black people are less than 10% longer than those applied to white people.
Why is there such a high crime rate among black people? Does someone's upbringing affect the person they become, or are we seeing the effects of systemic racism in the justice system? Children in single-parent families are far more likely to grow up in low-income households than those living with two parents. They are at greater risk of low academic performance and behavioral problems and may experience parental conflict and residential instability as well. Blacks have the lowest marriage percentage that the other races, with 68% of them ever getting married by age 46 opposed to 90% of whites and 84% of Hispanics. More black girls and boys are being raised in homes that are missing the husband and wife leadership than boys and girls from other races. Another factor unique in the black community is a disproportionate abortion rate. Do factors such as single-parent households have any relationship to the disproportionate crime rates found within the black community?